Step Sailor Venusaur? What are you doing? I'm sorry. I am so sorry for that. Oh my god. Alright, so now that I've scared off all the normies, here we are, third time around the block. Not gonna lie, this is a weird feeling for me. Because by this point, I'm more comfortable working on these videos, of course. My workflow on the Moltres video was so counterintuitive I could laugh, and hopefully I'm getting less awful at speaking and writing and whatnot, but the third in any trilogy is hard to pull off. Do you rely on the old conventions too much that you don't have a voice of your own? Or do you try to strike out on your own a bit too far and stray from what people are going to enjoy? Maybe a little bit of both, clashing with each other and taking down the whole series. Nevertheless, here we are again. Me and you. Or, more specifically, us and Venusaur. And this is a Pokemon that I am very personally invested in. Flashback to 6-year-old me. Christmas, 2003. My childhood wasn't a bad one, but we weren't exactly well off. Not enough that life was ever truly difficult for me as a child, but looking back, it's clear that we struggled more often than we didn't. Even back then as a kid, I knew not to ask for more than what would be expected, and not to ask for too much from Santa because he has billions of kids to take care of after all. But wrapped under the tree for me that day was a brand new lavender brick of a handheld, the Game Boy Advance, and a copy of Pokemon Red. Of course, by this point, the game was outdated, and I'm sure that the low price point was a decent factor in why I got it, but that didn't matter. This game captivated me as a child. Every day until I had to go back to school that winter break, it was spent with me glued to that tiny screen, encountering some not-so-colorful monsters and making memories that I still look back on fondly. Once school started again, it would be my go-to after-school activity. While it was obviously marketed as a social game, and an experience to have with your friends, it also worked fantastically as a single-player experience for a young, awkward, ADHD-riddled, and socially outcasted child. Of course, back then, tons of mechanics mystified me. The same stories you always hear. Running 4 attacks on every Pokemon, getting stuck in HM gates and more obscure areas of the game, pushing the truck to try to find Mew, a 200-hour playthrough to do what speedrunners can accomplish in under 2 regular hours now, the whole shebang. But it didn't matter. It was an entire world, contained in the palm of my hands, full of people to talk to and Pokemon to befriend. And, as you're probably guessing based on the topic of this video, the first one of those monsters that I encountered was Bulbasaur. As to why I chose it, I couldn't say. Probably just because it looked cool. I learned about evolution from Ivysaur, and the days where I thought that second form was the final form are still vivid in my head. The day Venusaur entered my life, I was so excited, running throughout our home showing everyone my new best friend. Those memories are always going to be special to me. So yeah, you could say that me and Venusaur go way back. What about today though? Where does my old best friend reside nowadays? Well, loyal viewers, if you recall, Moltres was in C rank and Machamp hung his head in shame in E, so it's time to dive into the deep, unexplored abyss between these letters to find what lies between them. So Venusaur is a Pokemon that, when you look at it on paper, you think, oh wow, this is great, this is amazing, I can't wait to use this. And then you realize that instead of paper, it's toilet paper, and instead of ink, it's shit. Let's start with the stats, because these are some of the most mid-stats I've ever seen. We have a special stat of 100, which is like, okay, and wow, look at that, it's also our best one. Low 80s for health, defense, attack, and speed leave us with a pretty frail Pokemon that can't hit hard on the physical side and only okay on the special side. And our speed is honestly the most disappointing because we don't really outspeed that many relevant threats. And what I mean by that is, yeah, we outspeed like Snorlax, Slowbro, Rhydon, Eggy, but these Pokemon aren't good because of their speed. Often you're playing around the fact that you know you're going to go second most of the time unless you set up Paralysis, or you're up against like another Slowmon. And that's okay, because these Pokemon are built to take a hit or 2 or 12 and still be okay to retaliate. The more frail mons are oftentimes faster to help alleviate this problem. We don't outspeed anything relevant because the Pokemon we outspeed don't care about us doing so, and the Pokemon that outspeed us are really good because they outspeed us. Look at Jolteon, super frail mon, less attack, defense, and health than Venusaur, but still has a better niche because of its insane speed and decent move pool, as well as being a pretty good type in pure electric. Obligatory watch this video, even though if you're watching this video and you haven't seen this, I'd be amazed. But let's talk about Venusaur's typing. As a grass poison type, we have a lot of things to talk about, so let's start on that grass type. Grass as a typing is pretty rare to see in OU, with only one monster running around commonly with it, but more on that later. Also, RIP Victory Bell, you will be missed. But the grass type. We hit rock, ground, and water for super effective damage, giving us that sweet 4 times damage against Kabutops. And I guess right on too if you care about that. But the only good grass damaging moves are Razor Leaf or maybe Petal Dance, which is of course locked behind the Vileplume line. Solar Beam is clearly the top intended move, but with the Charge Tome gimmick, it's super impractical. And that's just the beginning, because we also take double damage from like 1 and 2 half types, but to be more specific, 5. Bug, which doesn't matter, Poison, which really doesn't matter, Fire, which only matters if you're cool like Moltres, Flying, so Zapdos, and Ice, which is genuinely awful because Ice is probably the best that it'll ever be in Gen 1. Where has the time gone, my old friend? But yes, Ice Beam and Blizzard are everywhere in OU, so that's the primary reason why we don't see a ton of grass usage. And yes, you only do take half damage from electric, ground, water, and grass, which could give you a safe switch-in, but half damage is still damage, and with our stats, we really can't take too many chip hits. Also, Pokemon using electric, ground, water, and grass moves almost always have another option that could absolutely wreck us. But yeah, grass is not that great. In fact, like I said, there's really only one grass type that you're gonna see commonly in RBYOU. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or more specifically, the palm tree. Exeggutor has always been a top 6, sometimes a top 4 Pokemon, and trying to use another grass type is always going to have to come head to head against it eventually. So let's take a closer look on why Eggy is more commonly used than Venusaur. The first thing to note is to finish talking about the typings, because while they're both grass types, Eggy gets to rock the Psychic type, while we're stuck with Poison, meaning that the big lug is taking 4 times bug type damage. So Jolteon crit pin missile is scary, and that's the only relevant threat. But for Venusaur, we trade that one niche move on a somewhat lesser used Mon being scary, to Psychic being scary. A move that, as we established in the Machamp video, is usually ran between at least 2 to 3 members of most teams, due to just how great of a move it is, just like my ex-wife. Not to mention, the shared grass weaknesses to Fire, Ice, and Flying mean that neither of these Pokemon are defensive juggernauts, but Venusaur definitely gets the short end of the stick. Which, on the topic of defensive stats, Venusaur basically has none compared to Eggy. We get less health, less attack, slightly less defense, less special, which is of course one stat in Gen 1, and in exchange we get more speed, but not enough to make it a good trade. We go from 208 to 258, which means for staple OU threats, we really only outspeed Eggy and Cloyster compared to Pokemon that Exeggutor also outspeeds. And unlike Exeggutor, we don't have access to a paralysis move to help us outspeed return advantage. And that's the final piece of the puzzle as to why the tree beats the dinosaur on the ladder, the move pool. Let's start with Venusaur, because the little guy does get a few neat toys to play with. Swords Dance with Hyper Beam and Body Slam is always interesting, and mixed with Sleep Powder, that is dangerous potential combination. Razor Leaf is also a great move for the late game, especially notable as a reasonably safe way to remove Amnesia Slowbro. The problem though is that you really need all 5 of these moves to be effective, and that's obviously not possible. So the choice comes. Do you want to run Sleep on a different monster and run Swords Dance and with 3 attacks? Or do you do Sleep Powder, Swords Dance, Razor Wind, and one with 2 normal type moves? There's not a good pick for that one. Hyper Beam will get you cheesed if your opponent understands what you're doing, but Body Slam doesn't get the damage thresholds that you really need to make this viable. And you need Razor Leaf, otherwise you're being walled off by so much. Like Reflect Amnesia Slowbro, Cloyster, Starmie, you know, nothing major, just the monsters that you're afraid of for ice damage. So yeah, not a great pick no matter where you go. You could split the difference and go Double Edge, but like, no, just no. Eggy on the other hand, y'all already know what he's rocking. Explosion, Sleep Powder, Stun Spore, Psychic, Double Edge, which works in this context, and the admittedly less reliable Mega Drain, and the significantly less reliable but also hilarious, Egg Bomb. You have a few options on how to swap those around, and as long as you have Sleep Powder and usually Explosion, you're free to pick the other two as you want. So yeah, that's really the biggest reason why you don't see Venusaur on a team, because Eggy is mostly just a better version. And while running both is possible, the defensive issues and lack of special type coverage moves both Pokemon have mean that you're taking a big opportunity cost. But notice how I said Eggy was mostly better. On the Viability rankings, Venusaur is in D1, with the likes of fellow Swords Dance users, Kingler and Sandslash. D rank is of course defined by Smogon as reserved for Pokemon that are mediocre in the RBY metagame, but are decent enough to pose a threat at times, usually at a surprise. These Pokemon have a small niche in the metagame, and are often not worth using. And so far that seems like it's correct. Anyone who's seen both of my previous videos like this has seen the viability of C-rank Chad King Moltres and E-rank Person Machamp. And I'd say that on paper, putting it between them seems pretty fair, which means that maybe like Moltres, we can actually make a team that makes effective use of Venusaur on at least a semi-consistent basis. Hopefully, maybe. I got 4 tries here though, because I really like Venusaur, and I really want them to do well. These aren't really ranked at all. I'd say that the first few teams are tied for viability, but the last one is objectively the best. And on the topic of things being objectively the best, let's talk about our sponsor for this video. You already know where this joke is going. Hi, it's me, I made this. And I high-key love making these videos. Thank you for giving me an audience for them. Feel encouraged even to subscribe. I have doubled my subscriber count since the first of this year, and would love to hit 100 in the somewhat near future. Also, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, high five, hug, from handshake. I just crave affection ever since the seal left. And finally, don't forget to leave a comment down below if you have an idea for a future video. I'm working on a few new things right now that I hope everyone's going to enjoy, but they're probably going to take a little bit longer than these videos take, so you're probably going to get one more Pokemon review before anything new drops. But besides that, any ideas that you guys have, I want to hear them. Literally anything. I'll rank chili, I'll do toothbrush reviews, I'll eat my fucking microphone. Okay, so, for our first team here, we're rocking the Alakazam lead. Depending on what you think turn 1 will entail, you can use Alakazam with Starmie to eat sleep, or Rhydon to help beat a Thunder Wave and potentially cause a switch. Since we don't have an electric type on this set, our Starmie is going balls deep and rocking Thunder. I know, Thunder, but trust me, it really comes in handy sometimes. After bouncing these 3 around and spreading paralysis to most of the opponent's team, we try to get Snorlax in to set up Amnesia. By this point, with Thunderbolt and Blizzard, we should be able to take down a few threats and hopefully rest once or twice before we end up taking too much damage and going down. And finally, we have our endgame, Tauros and Venusaur. This applies for every team we're going to talk about, but the longer you can wait for Venusaur to come out, the better. I know it's tempting to go for the early sleep, but the surprise factor is still our best bet. And having a few opponents paralyzed is definitely going to help us out for a potential sweep. Tauros can help us with our harder counters, and hopefully Starmie or something will still be alive too, but ideally you get Venusaur out on something slow and unstatus like Snorlax or Chansey, you put them to sleep, set up Swords Dance, and then you use Razor Leaf to clear through threats like a paralyzed Starmie, Cloyster, or Rhydon, and your boosted Hyper Beam for monsters like Alakazam, Tauros, or Chansey. With a little luck, you can clear through the majority or all of your opponent's remaining Pokemon, leaving them being like, what the hell just happened? Sounds good, right? Well, here's some issues. For one, we're using Venusaur, and most likely our opponent is not going to be using Venusaur. And for 2, this set doesn't have an electric type, which, while not being mandatory obviously, is a feeling of loss I haven't felt since the divorce. But more specific issues of this team is that you really don't have a good answer for a turn 1 Thunder Wave. Rhydon can obviously switch in safely, but most lead mons can immediately wreck him afterwards besides like Jolteon, but having Starmie or Alakazam take the Thunder Wave really cripples them. Snorlax coming out early is a bad move too, because our Amnesia set is taken out quick by strong physical attackers or a Sleep user. Alright, so let's try again, let's shake things up a little bit more. Round 2, here we are. Gengar is our lead, and we're risking it all on the first turn Confuse Ray or Hypnosis, with the Explosion Get Out of Jail card. Afterwards, we have Psychic Blizzard Starmie with Explosion Cloyster to help clear through any early game walls the opponent tries to set up. We're using the same Amnesia Lax as last time, and our Tauros next, hopefully winning before we even need Venusaur. But between these two, we can definitely bully it. Get it? Bully? I'm hilarious, I know. But we can Snorlax our Venusaur in, or at least predict a switch for them. Gengar can eat a turn 1 paralysis and still try for hypnosis. We already aren't doing a super consistent strategy, so close your eyes, cross your fingers, hope for the best. It's fine. But the team's big issue is the dual water types in Stormy and Cloyster. We don't have a good answer for an electric type, and our early game typically folds to one because Gengar usually dies quickly and isn't a great counter anywhere. Ironically, our best counter to the electric type on this set is Venusaur himself, but while we're not that afraid of Jolteon, Zapdos can still wreck us with Dropback. But this team can still put in work. Not every team needs an electric type, so it's not a consistent issue you're going to be up against, but it's annoying enough to consider other options. Like how my ex-wife chose my brother. Oh my god, what am I doing with my life? Haha! Okay, so let's dive into Team 3, gamers! Stormy takes the lead on this team, Blizzard and Psychic give it coverage and stab, and our Zapdos dishes out that sweet, sweet electric type damage. Along with a Reflect, Self-Destruct Snorlax come in early game and put our opponent on the defensive. Slowbro comes out to wall with an Amnesia, Rest, Ice Beam, and Thunder Wave, meaning that really only a Stormy counter or Exploding Cloyster is truly scary. And during all of this, we should be able to juggle through a good chunk of the opponent's team, scouting out a sleep target for Venusaur, paralyzing the rest. After the big wall crumbles, Tauros and Venusaur come out to clean up shop. Venusaur puts something to sleep and sweeps with Swords Dance, Hyper Beam, or Razor Leaf. Tauros deals with anything that's especially scary. The issue with this team is a little bit harder to find, but it is still there, and honestly it makes this team the most inconsistent so far. We have 3 monsters that need to set up on this team, and that gives our opponent so many opportunities for cheese. So this team probably has the most potential, but that cheese is just going to ruin our life so much that it doesn't matter, and it just is going to make it the worst team so far overall. But I think there might be a way to fix this team up a bit. Slowbro obviously has to go. We can't have 3 setup mons, we need Snorlax, and ditching Venusaur to make the team better is going to be hilarious, but the video kind of demands that they stay on the team. So bye Slowbro, we need someone to take your place. But who is that going to be? Who could be pink and annoying and help us with special... Oh, okay. This is interesting. This is obviously super similar to the last team, so let's run through all the changes. We're doing Thunderbolt over Blizzard on Stormy, and Blizzard over Psych on Reflect Self-Destruct Lax, which is just a little choice, but either move is good against some mons and bad against others, but the big change-up is Chansey over Slowbro. Chansey is just being Chansey. A big special wall with an ice attack, Thunder Wave, Soft Boil, and Seismic Toss. This team gives us so many more opportunities for success in my opinion. This is the first Pokemon that I've talked about in these videos where I feel like Chansey is a really great asset to the team. And this might be the best niche team that I've ever come up with. We have our strong lead Pokemon and backup Paralysis Eater in Stormy and Chansey. Zapdos does insane damage if left unchecked. Snorlax is both a wall and a wall breaker with Reflect and Self-Destruct. Tauros is Tauros, and Venusaur gets to be a Swords Dance sleeper, late game, and devastating. Truly, this team could definitely catch your opponent off guard. And most teams in the endgame are really not set up well for a Venusaur sweep, because honestly, why would you worry about that? Most people would never even consider using a Venusaur, but on this team, right now, this D-ranked Pokemon is seemingly pretty solid. And if you get a little bit of luck, it can definitely be good enough to warrant using sometimes. But Eggy is good enough to warrant using all the time. So the question remains, is there any matchups that favor using Venusaur over Exeggutor? I suppose we're going to have to find out. We have our chart here for our matchups. We're going to be going through the OU Viability ladder again, looking at one-on-one matchups that favor one of these two over the other. The monster with a better matchup against the opponent ends up with them in their column, with monsters in the middle being an even match for Venusaur or Exeggutor, regardless of if it's an evenly good or bad matchup. Also, the higher on the list, but better representation of the category I consider them to be. Alright, any questions? No? Okay, cool. Let's get going. First up is your boy, Tauros. Most people's pick for the best overall Pokemon in the meta. Its stab body slam can paralyze either Mon, getting it in range for its stab Hyper Beam, which, unlike Venusaur, doesn't need to get boosted to be effective. On top of this, almost every Tauros has either Blizzard or Fire Blast, meaning super effective special damage, and a nasty status potentially, also. Although if anyone should be frozen, Venusaur is your best option. Neither one of these mons can outspeed a healthy Tauros, but both can take at least one hit, giving them a chance to put it to sleep. So yeah, so far that's a tie, but if another Pokemon is already asleep on your opponent's team, you and Venusaur are kinda screwed. But with Eggy, you can Stun Spore them, outspeed on turn 2, and explode. And yeah, it sucks that you lost your Exeggutor, but you took out the kingpin of your opponent's team with it. Or at least something that switches in predicting it. Or at the very least, you can paralyze that Tauros, which is sometimes enough to tilt the game in your favor. With Venusaur, you get a chance with sleep, but if you can't take it, you're done for. Eggy is taking this one for sure. Snorlax has a ton of potential sets, so it's a little tricky to say, so let's get into it. Both Mons can outspeed Snorlax to put it to sleep, so that's a plus, but Amnesia sets usually are an Ice Beam, meaning you're looking at a potential one-hit KO if you can't do that. On the individual side, you can paralyze and explode on an Amnesia Lax, giving you issues with Eggy, but if it's a Reflex Lax, you're basically walled unless you get lucky with Psychic special drops. Venusaur, on the other hand, is worried about Psychic, which is somewhat common on a couple different sets. And while Razor Leaf crit damage ignores Amnesia Lax's increased special defense, it doesn't matter because our move is a 1% chance to 3-hit KO them, while any boosted move besides Thunderbolt is probably going to take us down in one hit. I'll say that Snorlax is in the middle, but it is slightly better for Exeggutor than Venusaur, as Eggy is completely walled off by one set, while Venusaur is kinda messed up by a few. Chansey is up next, and the pink special tank is almost always packing Ice Beam, a dangerous prospect for either Pokemon. Exeggutor's Explosion is one of the most consistent ways of removing Chansey if sleep isn't an option, and it's usually a pretty good trade. But what if you could do that, but objectively a little bit better? Bringing in Venusaur on a paralyzed Chansey is a kinda safe way to set up Swords Dance. Usually your opponent is more focused on removing it versus paralyzing it, and Ice Beam is only a 3-hit KO. So ignoring crits and paralysis, you get about 2 free setup turns on average, 3 if you're lucky, and a +6 Venusaur Swords Dance will absolutely destroy Chansey with Hyper Beam. Now, okay, you've done that hypothetically. Unless you set up properly ahead of time, you are done for once something faster switches in to finish you off. But, unlike a successful Exeggutor Explosion, where you and your opponent switch in at the same time afterwards, in this case, your opponent comes in first, then unalives Venusaur, then you switch into your counter next, which is a great way to keep the advantage of the game in your hand. It's not a huge niche, but Stun Spore doesn't really help Exeggutor versus Chansey, as it already outspeeds it, so Explosion and or Sleep is your best choice, and it just so happens that I think Swords Dance and Sleep is a better combo for this one, and that point goes to Venusaur. Okay, so we get our first Mio matchup here. Eggy versus Eggy is a really awkward matchup. You're just trying to put the other Exeggutor to sleep so you could switch out, you're really trying to cheese Psychic drops, or you're going for the nuclear option. And with the speed tie, it's really up to luck how this one goes. Venusaur, on the other hand, fares much better. Kinda. A little bit. Slightly better. We outspeed Eggy, letting us put it to sleep, then charge Hyper Beam. But we only get one shot to put them to sleep before they can do the same. They can hit us with a Psychic that's a minimum of 63%, or worse than both of these options, they can paralyze us. As I mentioned before, if any Pokemon on your team should be eating sleep, a Venusaur that you've already used to put something to sleep is your best bet almost 100% of the time. But if we get paralyzed, we obviously can't do this, and then we basically just die. So, this matchup favors a healthy Venusaur, but just barely. You can put Eggy to sleep, but if you miss, or if you just can't, you're kinda screwed. Okay, so let's talk about the actual number 4 now, Starmie. Starmie is a serious threat to both of these Pokemon, but Venusaur gets absolutely wrecked in comparison. Most Stormy sets run Recover, Thunder Wave, and 2 attacks. Usually that means you're picking between Thunderbolt, Psychic, and Blizzard. Sometimes you'll see the odd Hydro Pump for people who are afraid of Rhydon, or Thunder for people who are afraid of condoms, but they're way less common. So out of these 3 moves, 2 do half damage to Exeggutor, with 1 doing double damage, so I mean you could get lucky. But for Venusaur, you're looking at 2 super effective moves, and 1 not effective, and that's enough to score Iggy the win by itself, not to mention the fact that Exeggutor getting paralysis matters way less than it does for Venusaur, as we mentioned earlier. So yeah, it's not looking good for him. Point to Iggy. And on that note, this is the worst matchup for Venusaur versus Exeggutor so far. Alakazam. As I said in my Machamp video. And finally we come to the big Psychic type final boss, Alakazam. Strongest non-boosted Psychic in the game. Thunder Wave, Recovery. You already know why Alakazam is scary. That's the same effect here. While Eggy can only get chipped and scared off with Psychic drops or paralysis and seismic tosses, Venusaur is getting absolutely wrecked. Psychic caps off for damage in the mid-80s, and that's not saying anything about Alakazam's insane critical hit rate. This is a problem for all fast Pokemon, but I saved it for Alakazam to talk about because, Jesus, 23%. What 90s crack were they smoking, and where do I get a time machine? And on top of that, just like Tauros, paralyzing Alakazam is a big deal, as it's insanely crippled to status. I'm sorry Venusaur, I can't even try for you here. Okay, so let's run through this so far, and honestly, so far so... yeah. I'm not sure what to make of it honestly, because while we get a few good matchups, the Eggy one isn't that great, and other Pokemon are better or at least more consistent at removing Chansey also. Snorlax being weird and incomprehensible is par for the course. But the bad matchups are bad matchups for Venusaur. Eggy is clearly a more consistent Pokemon, but let's keep digging and see what we find. Ready, set, lightning round. Rhydon is a great matchup for Venusaur, as Razor Leaf is a guaranteed one-hit KO 255 out of 256 times. For Iggy though, you have to put it to sleep and whittle it down with Psychic, or maybe Mega Drain, but that's more niche, so you're giving your opponent more turns to turn it around. Zapdos is a deadly threat to either Pokemon, but is another fast, frail Mon that's weak to getting paralyzed, so Eggy can definitely do more damage to it than Venusaur, but it's a bad matchup either way, so like, barely. Cloyster is one of the only relevant threats that is outsped by Venusaur but not Exeggutor, giving us a notable advantage against the Clamp user. Unfortunately, we can't paralyze it to our advantage, but Razor Leaf maxes out at 99.6% damage, so any chip damage and you're likely to get it taken down. Besides that though, while Exeggutor is taken out pretty consistently by Clamp in the Blizzard, Venusaur outspeeding makes that much harder. Jinx sucks. I hate Jinx. And so do both of these Pokemon pretty evenly. Able to be put to sleep before we get a chance to, slamming us with Stab, Blizzard, and Psychic, and no good way to remove it safely. It's in the Snorlax category, and it's honestly better at the category than Snorlax is. I hate Jinx. I really hate Jinx. Gengar is so bad versus Exeggutor, but so good versus Venusaur, it's not even funny. It's like a triangle of pain. Gengar's Psychic obliterates us, while Exeggutor's Psychic obliterates Gengar, and our Hyper Beam is a clean 50,000 hit KO on Gengar. Not our best moment. Jolteon is tied in that it can't do much to either of us, but what it can do is just annoying. Pin Missile crits can destroy Exeggutor, or just waste its time if you don't get the... hang on, let me check. 25%. Jesus Christ. 25% chance to crit. For Venusaur on the other hand, we're going to be eating a Thunder Wave, and while that's dangerous against Jolteon, it cripples us against the important matchups that we have to have afterwards. So it's a decent tie, but I would say you could argue one point being more important than the other. So let's just put it at the bottom of the middle category. Last member of the main competition is Slowbro, and this is one of the main reasons why you'd run Venusaur over Exeggutor. Fear of Slowbro. Slowbro usage really seems to be on the rise lately. Lots of players have been experimenting with it, And truly, I think we've all been personally victimized by a fully set up Amnesia Slowbro. It's just a terrifying final wall to be up against. It has a lot of different sets, but if you mix Amnesia with Reflect, Rest, and an attacking move, there's not much that can touch it. Except, in Generation 1, critical hits ignore stat increases, and Razor Leaf almost always crits. 68 and 80% is the range of damage you can do, so you do some damage with something else before it dies, bring in Venusaur, and then you get your revenge like you're my ex-wife. Obviously you might tank Thunderwave, but if you can clear through Slowbro with your Venusaur, you have fulfilled a pretty good function. If it was a one-hit KO, it would be the best matchup beating Rhydon, but second place is definitely nothing to sneeze at. And this is surprising. I didn't expect it to end up being this even, but out of the 13 main threats, it's 5-3-5, and that's... wow. I really feel like Venusaur gets a bad rap. It's not like amazing by any means, but I could honestly see it making its way to C rank at some point in the future. It's not a perfect Pokemon, none of them are, but the point of this video, and this series in general, is that sometimes you really can't judge a book by its cover. Remember, the rankings are voted on by people who play the game way more than I do, so take all of this with a grain of salt. But when was the last time you used a Pokemon like Moltres, Venusaur, or Machamp? For most of us, never. We look at the ladder, we see the top 6, we see the top 13, and we never deviate from that. But how do we know these Pokemon's strengths, weaknesses, and niches without experimentation and accepting that failure is going to come along the way? I never would have learned how much I love using Moltres, or how much I really don't like using Machamp, without going in with an open mind and giving them a chance. In a way, I guess this is saying more about me than anything else. I never thought I'd be able to make a video like this, and honestly expect another human being to actually watch it. And I'm guessing that that's going to take a while to change for me. So, thank you for watching. This video, and all the ones to come, are made for you. Thank you for not judging a book by its cover with Venusaur. And me. Catch you next time.